I was in the backyard, trimming my rose bushes like I did every Thursday morning. The sun was already high enough to warm the soil, and the scent of earth clung to my gloves. I wore the same beige cardigan I always did when gardening, fraying at the sleeves, but soft and dependable. The roses were coming in beautifully this year, early bloomers, red and full, like they had something to prove. That's when my phone buzzed in the pocket of my cardigan. I wiped my gloves on my apron and pulled it out without even checking the screen. There was no need. Only one person ever called me anymore. My son, Caleb. "Hey, Mom," he said, and I could tell immediately. His voice already had that tone, flat but forced calm, like a man who'd practiced his lines and was praying I wouldn't interrupt the delivery. My breath caught, not from surprise, but from a dull ache in my ribs. I'd been waiting for this. "I just wanted to let you know Ethan's wedding is Saturday," he said. "We all talked, and we think it's probably better if you don't come." He didn't even pause. Just like that, a knife slid in between my ribs. No explanation, no apology, just a clean, polite execution over the phone. I didn't say anything, not because I didn't have words, God knows I had enough of them, but because something inside me told me silence would say more. So I let it sit, let him squirm. "It's not personal," he added, which is what people say when they're trying to make betrayal sound professional. "Jenna said it might be too overwhelming for you. You know, with your memory stuff." My memory stuff. I almost laughed. I'm 72, not senile. I still manage my own finances. I still cook every meal from scratch. I haven't missed a birthday, anniversary, or dental appointment in 30 years, but Jenna, my daughter-in-law, with her glass voice and flawless smirk, had been planting that seed for months. I didn't even ask who we all was. I already knew. Jenna, most definitely. Probably Ethan too. Maybe even that smug cousin of hers, who printed an online certificate and now calls herself a family therapist. They'd all had their meeting, I'm sure. Their quiet coup. "It's what Ethan wants," Caleb added, as though that softened the blow. I thought of Ethan at 5, clinging to my leg during thunderstorms. At 10, yelling with joy at a Cubs game while holding my hand. At 16, when I co-signed his first car loan because Caleb couldn't afford it that month. But at 25, apparently, Ethan wanted a wedding without his grandmother. I looked up at the sky, 2 hawks circling silently above the sycamore tree. I wondered if they sensed it, the way families turn cold. "Okay," I said, and hung up. I stood there a moment longer, phone still in hand, until the screen went black. Then I slipped it into my pocket and walked back inside. The kitchen was cool and quiet. My invitation was still stuck on the fridge, right next to Ethan's 3rd-grade drawing of the sun, with a smiley face and Grandma's house written in red crayon. I pulled the invite off, held it in my hand, and without ceremony, dropped it into the trash. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I opened the freezer and pulled out the cookie dough I'd prepared for the wedding favors, lemon sugar with white chocolate chips. I'd prepped them 2 weeks ago, thinking it'd save me time. I slid the tray into the oven like it was just another Thursday. As they baked, the scent filled the kitchen, citrus and vanilla, the smell of birthdays and snow days, of Ethan laughing in my kitchen and licking the spoon when he thought I wasn't looking. I sat at the table, sipping tea from my chipped World's Best Grandma mug, staring at the wall. Not thinking, not feeling, just being. When the cookies were done, I packed them neatly into a Tupperware container, tied a yellow ribbon around it, and walked down the block. Caleb's house sat 3 doors away, new paint and an American flag on the porch. Jenna insisted on hanging after the election. I didn't knock. I just left the cookies by the door with a sticky note. "For the celebration, Mom." Then I walked home in silence, not sure if I felt more like a ghost or a fool. That night, I put my phone on silent. I watched the screen light up with messages I didn't open. Apologies that weren't really apologies. Explanations that were really just excuses. The worst kind of betrayal isn't loud, it's quiet, careful, dressed up as concern. And I knew then, if I was being erased from my own family's story, I'd be damned if I went quietly. The next morning, I woke before the sun. I sat in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling fan slowly spinning overhead, listening to the low hum it made like a distant train. My bones ached a little more than usual, but I didn't rush to get up. I let the stillness settle into me. Sometimes silence is comforting. Other times, like now, it's just confirmation that no one's coming. I moved through the kitchen, like a ghost. Put on a pot of coffee, even though it tasted bitter on mornings like these. I pulled out the mixing bowls, butter and sugar, without thinking. My body knew the motions, even if my mind didn't want to follow. I hadn't planned to bake more cookies. I didn't need to, but grief is funny. It makes you reach for the things that used to mean something, even if they no longer do. I made Ethan's favorite again, lemon sugar cookies with white chocolate chips, the kind I used to pack in his lunchbox, with handwritten notes that said things like, "You've got this," or "Smile today, you make the world brighter." He used to stick them on his bedroom wall until it looked like a scrapbook exploded in there. I measured each scoop like I was pouring memory into dough. Vanilla extract, 2 teaspoons, lemon zest, 1 whole rind, white chips, never too many. He didn't like them overwhelming the flavor. When the first batch came out, I stood in the kitchen with the tray in my hands, letting the steam rise to my face. It smelled like holidays, like bedtime stories, and thunderstorms, and childhood. It smelled like love, the kind you don't even think about, because it's always been there, the kind that doesn't get an invitation to the wedding. I sat down with a warm cookie and a photo album. Not one of the fancy leather-bound ones, just a plain old binder with sticky pages and plastic covers that crinkled when you turned them. There was Ethan at 6, his cheeks full and freckled, grinning wide with 2 teeth missing. Him in his Halloween costume. Spider-Man, 3 years in a row. Him and me on the porch, both of us wearing Cubs hats, holding hot dogs and smiling so wide it hurt just to look. There was one photo I lingered on. His high school graduation. He stood next to me, in a navy blue gown, his arm around my shoulders, and I remembered exactly what he whispered before the picture was taken. "You're the reason I made it." He meant it then. I didn't cry. I didn't have the energy. Instead, I flipped the page and kept going. Kept looking at proof. Proof that I was there. Proof that I mattered. Around noon, I walked the cookies down to the shelter on Jefferson Street. I told the receptionist they were extras, for anyone who wanted a treat. She smiled, thanked me, said it would make the day brighter for the kids. On the way home, I passed by the florist shop, the same one I used to take Ethan to every spring so he could pick a bouquet for his mother's birthday. He'd always choose the loudest, most colorful blooms, sunflowers, irises, tulips and clashing reds and purples. He didn't care about style, he just wanted them to make her smile. Back home, I sat at the dining table and looked around the room. Nothing had changed in 20 years. Same lace curtains, same oak chairs. The walls still held Ethan's finger paintings and Caleb's old report cards. Even the crooked clock that always ran 5 minutes slow still ticked, stubborn in its refusal to be corrected. I wasn't angry yet. That came later. Right now, I was just hollow. It's a strange thing, being slowly written out of your own story. Not with a scream, not with slammed doors, but with omissions, forgotten names, unsent invitations, a slow erasure dressed up as kindness. Jenna always smiled when she did it. That tight practice smile that never touched her eyes. She'd been chipping away at me for years. Comments about how I shouldn't overexert myself, how I deserved to rest, how I might be more comfortable if someone else handled the detail. At first, I thought she was just trying to help. That's how it starts. You know, help. Then it becomes control. Then it becomes silence. She once told Caleb that my stories were starting to repeat, that I asked the same questions more than once at dinner. Caleb brought it up gently, like he was trying to protect me from embarrassment. I laughed it off, made a joke about senior moments, but I remembered that night clearly. I hadn't repeated a thing. I'd been testing her. She'd failed. I didn't tell him. I didn't want to be the mother who sowed discord in her son's marriage. But maybe I should have been. I made soup that night, carrot ginger, Ethan's favorite when he was sick. I didn't know why. Maybe just to remember what it felt like to care for someone. Maybe just to keep my hands busy so my mind didn't wander to places too dark to sit in alone. I poured myself a bowl, sat by the window, and watched the sky turn pink. If I was going to be erased, I thought, it wouldn't be quietly. It wouldn't be clean. They wanted me to fade into the background. They forgot I still held the pen. The morning after I delivered the cookies to the shelter, I found myself standing in front of my old filing cabinet. It sat in the back corner of the guest bedroom, behind a woven chair and a quilt rack. I hadn't opened it in months, maybe a year. It was the kind of piece no one notices but holds a lifetime inside. I pulled open the bottom drawer, hearing the metal groan with the weight of too many years. Inside were my tax returns, Caleb's kindergarten report card, Tom's death certificate, and a yellowed envelope marked life insurance payout. I touched that envelope gently, like it might bruise, and felt the weight of it all, grief and grit, survival disguised as paperwork. Tom died when I was 26. A factory accident. Freak electrical fire, the kind of story that made the local paper for a day and left me with a toddler and a house full of bills. I didn't get a chance to grieve the way young widows are supposed to. There was no curling into bed, no mourning in silk robes, no casseroles delivered by sympathetic neighbors. I went back to work 3 days after the funeral. First shift at the diner, down on 6th Street. Then weekend cleaning gigs in the suburbs. I scrubbed other people's sinks and smiled at their children, while mine sat with coloring books in the booth near the kitchen. Caleb never complained, not even once. He'd fall asleep on my lap during the late-night bus rides home, and I'd hum old songs into his hair, just to convince myself we were okay. Every dollar I made went into keeping him fed, keeping him safe. I clipped coupons so I could buy him the sneakers all the boys wore, lied to the principal about our address so he could attend the better school across town. When he was 11, he won a regional science fair. I'll never forget the way he ran off that stage, medal clutched in his fist, shouting, "My mom's the smartest person I know." I held on to that sentence for years. Kept it in my pocket, like a charm, something to press between my fingers whenever the world got too loud. And now, decades later, that same boy told me to sit this one out. I stood up slowly, joints aching, as I moved back to the kitchen. On the table sat my estate folder, still unopened from when Ava helped me prepare it. I pulled it toward me and flipped it open. I'd kept Caleb as the primary beneficiary all these years. Not because he asked, but because I believed in him. Because I thought loyalty should outlive disappointment. Ava was the one who made me rethink all that. She was my goddaughter, not by blood, but by bond. Her mother, Nadine, had been my best friend in high school. When Nadine passed, Ava had no one. She came to live with me for 6 months, before college, and never forgot it. She visited on holidays, called every week, and not once forgot my birthday. She even showed up when I got pneumonia 3 years ago and stayed for 2 weeks to help me recover. It was during that recovery that she started asking questions. Did I have a will? A trust? Did I understand how vulnerable I was with no protection in place? I told her Caleb would handle things. I trusted him. She didn't argue. Ava never does. She just said, "You need a plan in case love turns into leverage." I remember laughing. I thought it was dramatic, but she'd already scheduled a meeting with her firm's estate attorney by the time I finished my soup. We drafted everything. Living trust, health directives, a clause Eva called the kill switch. If I ever felt coerced, disrespected, or endangered, I could reallocate the entire trust with just 2 notarized forms, no permission needed. At the time, it felt like overkill. Now, it felt like foresight. The trust held $1.2 million, a number I never said aloud. People don't expect women like me, diner workers, single mothers, quiet neighbors, to have that kind of security. But I saved. I sold the rental property I inherited from my uncle. I invested the payout from Tom's death. I lived small, so Caleb could live big. I never flaunted it. I didn't have designer purses or granite countertops. But I knew how to stretch a dollar and make it multiply. Caleb and Jenna knew about the trust. They never asked directly, but I saw the way they circled around the topic. The subtle comments about college funds, home renovations, even Ethan's down payment. They were counting on it. Counting on me disappearing before I used the pen they forgot I held. I closed the estate folder and went to the hall closet. Inside was a small safe, tucked beneath extra linens. I spun the dial, opened the door, and pulled out my notarized forms. All it would take was 2 signatures and 1 meeting with Shannon, Ava's lawyer. I walked back to the table and stared at the papers. They wanted me invisible, but I was about to become unforgettable. I called Ava the next morning. she answered on the second ring, her voice already sharp with instinct. What did they do? I didn't even ask how she knew. That's the thing about people who love you without conditions. They don't need backstory to take your side. I sat at the kitchen table, the safe open beside me, my reading glasses perched on the bridge of my nose. I'm not going to the wedding, I said flatly. Caleb called, said they all agreed. She didn't speak, for a moment. Then, want me to drive over? No, I said, looking at the neatly stacked documents in front of me. I want you to call Shannon. Ava's voice dropped into that tone she uses when she means business. Do you want to remove Caleb and Jenna? I stared at the trust paperwork, like it had just asked me the same thing. Yes, I said, and I want to add Ethan back in. There was a pause on the line, the kind filled with respect. Then a quiet, got it. By noon, we had an appointment for the next day. That evening, Ava came by with a briefcase and a bottle of red wine. She let herself in with the spare key. I never took back. The second she walked through the door, I felt the weight on my chest loosen, just slightly. Ava has that effect, like fresh air in a sealed room. She wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, and those smart gray slacks that made her look like she ran a courtroom even when she was just walking through Trader Joe's. She didn't ask me how I was. She didn't offer sympathy. She just sat across from me, pulled out her laptop, and got to work. Shannon's prepping the amendments, she said, fingers tapping against the keys. She'll have everything ready to sign by tomorrow. Once it's notarized, Caleb and Jenna are removed. You'll retain full control. I nodded. And Ethan? We'll add him back, she said. But with the condition you mentioned. If he comes to you in person, within 30 days, you can leave his portion intact. And if he doesn't? Then it's yours to redirect entirely. You're not obligated. I sipped my tea, letting the warmth settle into my chest. That's fair. If he doesn't want to know the truth, he doesn't deserve the reward. Ava looked at me closely then, her eyes softening. This isn't about punishment for you, is it? No, I said. It's about proof that I mattered, that I existed, that I'm not just some invisible old woman on the edge of their perfect little family photo. Ava reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You've always mattered. This just makes sure they never forget it. We stayed up late that night, sorting through papers, receipts, even old text messages I'd saved over the years. I wasn't looking for evidence. I was reminding myself that my memory still served me just fine. You know, Ava said, as she tucked a printout into a file, the way Jenna operates, it's not just toxic, it's calculated. She's been undermining you slowly, methodically. This wasn't a spontaneous exclusion. It was a campaign. I nodded, and Caleb just let it happen. Ava's mouth tightened. Because it was easier than defending you. I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was tired. He didn't even flinch, just said it was for the best. Like I was a fragile vase, someone had to gently set aside. You're not fragile, Ava said. No, I agreed, I'm not. Before she left, she handed me a sealed envelope. This is the test transfer, she explained. $250,000. We'll move it under my name, as a flagged transition. If Caleb checks the trust account, and he will, he'll notice. It's a signal, nothing explicit, just enough to let them know something changed. I held the envelope like it might break. They'll panic. They should. After she left, I sat in the living room alone. The wine, untouched. The lamp, casting long shadows across the floor. I watched the clock for no reason, other than habit. The ticking sound as steady as my pulse. I thought about Caleb, as a child. How he used to crawl into my bed, after nightmares, and ask if I'd still be there in the morning. I always told him, yes. And I always was. But he wasn't here now. He'd built a life where I didn't fit, where I was a liability to be managed, not a mother to be cherished. And maybe he thought I wouldn't notice. Maybe he thought love made me blind. But Ava reminded me that love also makes you brave. So I stood, walked to the safe, and tucked the envelope inside. I locked it with deliberate fingers. One click, then another. By the time I went to bed, I'd stopped feeling small. I wasn't someone they forgot. I was someone they underestimated. 2 days before the wedding, I found myself standing in the baking aisle of the local grocery store, staring blankly at a bottle of vanilla extract. I held it in my hand for nearly a full minute before realizing I had no reason to be there. I'd come out of habit. I'd written lemon bundt cake on my shopping list, thinking I'd bring it to the rehearsal dinner like I always had for Ethan's birthdays and big moments. But there was no rehearsal dinner for me. No bundt cake. No seat at the table. Still, I walked the aisles slowly, picking up butter, sugar, and flour, like I might wake up tomorrow and find out this had all been a mistake. At checkout, Lisa, the cashier who's worked there since she was in high school, smiled and asked, "Excited for the big weekend?" I blinked. She tilted her head. "Ethan's wedding, right? Everyone's talking about it." I nodded and gave a tight smile. "Been a little busy." She waved me off. "Well, I'm sure it'll be beautiful. I hear they have a live band and everything." I paid for the ingredients I didn't need, drove home in silence, and put them in the pantry like maybe one day I'd find a reason to use them again. That night, something pulled me toward Facebook. I hadn't opened it in weeks. I usually avoided it, too many memories, too many faces I no longer spoke to, but curiosity has its own gravity. Jenna's profile was the first one that popped up. Her newest post was a black and white photo from the engagement shoot. Ethan was kissing her temple on a windswept beach, their silhouettes glowing like something out of a perfume ad. The caption read, "This weekend, we say I do, surrounded by those who've shown up for us, supported us, and loved us unconditionally." It was the last line that turned my stomach. The comments were full of hearts and exclamation marks, but one in particular made me sit up straighter. "So glad you cut out the toxic energy. Blood isn't always family." And another, "Proud of you for protecting your peace." I clicked through to the album titled Final Prep. There were photos of the bridal shower, the rehearsal dinner setup, the monogrammed gift bags I had paid for months ago, custom totes, filled with local snacks and handwritten welcome cards I'd designed and printed myself. Not once was I tagged. Not once was I mentioned. Then I saw it. A short video clip. It was filmed inside my own living room. The engagement planning dinner. I had hosted it, cooked every dish, cleaned for 2 days, brought out the good china. The video was cropped carefully, just enough to cut me out of the frame. But I recognized my wallpaper, my rug, my tea set. I even saw the ceramic vase Ethan made in 3rd grade, sitting quietly on the mantel. They hadn't just excluded me. They'd edited me out. With surgical precision, I closed the app, shut the laptop, and sat in silence until the room felt too loud. I walked into the kitchen, opened the drawer where I kept old notes and cards, and pulled out one from Ethan's high school graduation. It was written in his scrawled, half-grown handwriting, "Grandma, you're the reason I believe in family. You've been there every step. I hope I make you proud." I folded it carefully and slid it into my coat pocket, like armor. The next morning, I baked one more batch of cookies, just a dozen this time. Lemon sugar, the same as always. I walked them down the block to Caleb's front step. I didn't leave a note, just a ribbon with Ethan's name on the tin. It wasn't for forgiveness, it was a statement. I was still here. I still existed, and I would not disappear quietly. That afternoon, Ava texted me, "Docs are ready. When you're ready, we make the move." I stared at the message for a long moment before replying, "Monday, first thing." That night, I didn't toss and turn. I slept. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I finally had a plan. And it didn't involve waiting for anyone else to see my worth. It was time they felt the absence of the woman they had so confidently removed. The morning after I texted Ava, I woke with a strange sense of clarity. It wasn't peace, exactly. It was something sharper. Like my body had finally caught up with a decision my heart made days ago. There were no dreams, no dread, just quiet determination in the air. I got up early and dressed with care. Slacks, a clean blouse, and the gold earrings Tom gave me for our 10th anniversary. I rarely wore them. Only when I needed to remind myself who I'd been before grief chipped away at my softness. I pulled my gray hair into a bun, the same way I used to for job interviews and school conferences. I looked at myself in the mirror. The lines were deeper, but the woman inside them hadn't changed. Ava arrived, right at 9, punctual, as ever. She wore a tailored navy blazer and held 2 coffees and her leather briefcase. She didn't ask if I was ready. She just smiled and handed me my cup. "You look fierce," she said. "I feel it," I replied. The law office was tucked into a quiet street lined with old brick buildings and flower boxes. It looked more like a converted home than a firm, which made it feel less intimidating. Inside, soft instrumental music played over the speakers, and a bowl of mints sat on the front desk. Shannon, the attorney, came out to greet us. She was in her mid-40s, with short cropped hair and a voice that could split steel if needed. But her eyes were kind. The kind that had seen women walk in wearing grief and leave with something like closure. We followed her into a small conference room. The table was round, not long, which felt like a subtle rebellion against the idea of power being on one side. Shannon laid out the documents carefully, one by one. Everything was color-coded, tabbed and printed on thick stock paper. She didn't waste time. "This," she said, tapping the top sheet, "is the revision removing Caleb Whitman and Jenna Whitman as beneficiaries to the Eleanor Whitman Family Trust." She glanced at me. "The new recipients will be Ava Collins, effective immediately, and Ethan Whitman, pending the completion of your personal condition." I nodded. "Do we still have the clause included?" Shannon turned to the second tab and read aloud, "If the secondary beneficiary, Ethan Whitman, does not make an in-person visit to the truster within 30 calendar days of this signing, all benefits allocated to him shall be nullified and returned to the truster's discretionary control." "Do you still want this in place?" she asked. "Yes," I said, without hesitation. "If he wants the truth, he can ask for it, but I won't beg to be believed." She slid the pen toward me. My hand trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the weight of it all. Generations of sacrifice boiled down to a few strokes of ink. I signed each page, initialed every clause. Ava did the same as witness. When the final signature dried, Shannon stacked the papers and said, "It's now legally binding. Any revocation requires in-person approval and dual notarization." "Perfect," I said. As we stood to leave, Shannon handed Ava a manila envelope. "Here's the fund transfer receipt. 250,000 has already been moved to your name, flagged as inheritance transition, subtle but noticeable." Ava looked at me. "They'll see it. They'll know something shifted." "Good," I said. We walked out of that office into the cold spring air, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a bystander in my own life. On the drive home, Ava talked logistics, next steps, how to lock down the online accounts, when to notify the bank, but I let her voice fade into the hum of the car. My thoughts drifted to Caleb and Jenna, sitting at their breakfast table with matching mugs, imagining their future carved from money they never earned. They'd carved me out first. Now they'd feel the absence. By dinner time, I was back at my kitchen table, watching the last rays of sun pour through the curtains. The envelope from Shannon sat beside my cup of tea, unopened. I didn't need to look. I knew what it meant. My phone buzzed. "Caleb." I stared at the screen for a full 30 seconds before pressing decline. 5 minutes later, it buzzed again. Then came the text. "We need to talk. Urgent." I didn't reply. Another message followed. "Is this about the trust?" Ethan's down payment was in there. "What's going on, Mom?" And there it was. Not concern, not regret, panic. They'd noticed. Not because they cared, but because something now cost them. I placed the phone face down and poured myself a glass of wine. Then I walked out to the porch and sat beneath the amber sky, listening to the cicadas scream into the dusk. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not vindication. Not triumph. Something quieter. Visibility. For once I wasn't invisible. I was felt. Not in the way I used to hope for, but in the way that mattered now. Let them call. Let them panic. I wasn't going to vanish quietly into their rewritten story. I had just begun my own. The knock came just before noon the next day. 3 short raps on the front door. Not a neighbor's knock. Not a delivery. This knock carried the weight of someone bracing for fallout. I didn't have to check the peephole. I knew who it was. I opened the door and found Caleb standing on the porch, looking smaller than I'd seen him in years. His button-down shirt was wrinkled, half untucked, and his eyes were bloodshot, like he hadn't slept. Behind him, Jenna's white SUV idled at the curb. She didn't get out. She never would. I stepped aside. I didn't offer a smile, didn't say a word. He walked in like a man entering a courtroom, his eyes drifting over the same living room he grew up in, the same couch where he'd watched Saturday cartoons, the same wall where his graduation photo still hung in a modest wooden frame. "I'm not here to fight," he said, voice tight. I need to understand what's going on. I moved into the kitchen and filled the kettle. You've been removed from the trust, I said plainly. Jenna too. The funds have been reallocated. He followed, but didn't cross the threshold. He stood in the doorway, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to sit. But why? He asked. Why now? I turned, met his eyes, and for the first time in years, didn't flinch. You told me not to come to my grandson's wedding. You said it was what everyone wanted. His face twisted, like my words had slapped him. It wasn't like that, Jenna said. You'd been acting forgetful, that maybe it would be too much stress for you. I didn't want to hurt you. I set 2 mugs on the counter and poured the tea. You didn't want to hurt me, but you let her frame me as unstable. You let her cut me out of every event, every conversation, and you let Ethan believe I didn't care enough to show up. He finally sat down, elbows on the table, rubbing his temples. I didn't know about the down payment, he said. That money was part of the wedding gift. We were counting on it. I stirred honey into my cup, hands calm, though my chest ached. You were counting on money from someone you didn't even want in the room. Tell me how that makes sense. He didn't answer, just stared at the steam rising from his mug. This isn't just about hurt feelings, he said finally. Ethan's devastated. He thought you were ignoring him. Jenna told him you didn't want to be involved, that you were confused, maybe even slipping a little. I laughed once, low and bitter. She's been laying that groundwork for years. Whispering behind my back, twisting everything. He looked down at the table like it might give him the words he couldn't find. I didn't know how far it had gone. I stood and retrieved a folder from the drawer. Inside was a printed screenshot of the trust summary, a list of disbursements, and a letter I'd written by hand. I slid it across the table. This is what you're not getting, I said. Not because I want to punish you, but because I needed to remember I still have a voice in this family. He picked up the papers with shaking hands. His eyes scanned the contents, and when he reached the clause about Ethan needing to visit me within 30 days, his brows furrowed. You'd still leave something to Ethan? I met his gaze, steady. If he comes, not because he's forced to, but because he wants to know the truth, then yes. I still believe in him, but not through you. Not through her. He swallowed. You don't know what this is going to do. No, I said. You don't know what it already did. We sat in silence for a while. Then, from outside, the sharp blast of Jenna's horn cut through the air. One honk. Impatient. I didn't even look toward the window. Caleb stood slowly, holding the envelope like it was heavier than paper had a right to be. He paused at the door. If he comes, I said, let it be on his own terms. Not yours, not hers. He nodded, eyes glossy, and walked out without another word. I didn't watch him drive away. I sat back down with my tea, still warm, and stared at the chair across from me, the one my son had just vacated. He wasn't a boy needing his mother anymore. He was a man, finally realizing what happens when you let someone else write your mother out of her own story. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if Ethan would come, but I knew I wouldn't be erased again without a fight. I didn't expect him to come back the next day, but he did. This time, there was no honking from the curb, no SUV idling like a getaway car, just a slow knock, followed by a silence so dense it made the walls feel closer. When I opened the door, Caleb stood there with a folder in his hand. It looked like it weighed 100 pounds. His face was drawn tight, and the skin under his eyes had taken on that hollowed-out gray that only comes from truth breaking through denial. Can we talk? He asked. I nodded and stepped aside. I didn't offer coffee. I didn't offer warmth. I just sat down in the living room and waited. He took the chair across from me, set the folder on his lap, and looked at it like it might burn him. After I left yesterday, he began, I started going through everything. Our shared files, Jenna's backups, calendar invites, even our cloud storage. He didn't look up. I didn't want to believe it, but I found things, Mom. Messages with your name on them that you never sent. Facebook screenshots of chats where you supposedly said awful things, even one where you canceled Ethan's tux fitting and told the planner it was a waste of money for a second-rate wedding. He finally looked at me, eyes full of disbelief. She used your name, fabricated whole conversations. I didn't speak. I just waited. He reached into the folder and pulled out printed transcripts, dozens of pages of forged texts, manipulated voicemails, even calendar events I never created. She edited your voicemail messages, he said. Spliced together clips to make it sound like you were ranting or confused. Ethan believed it. She played one of them for him. He thought you were unstable. He thought you didn't want to be at the wedding. I felt something inside me settle. Not anger, not sadness, just a cold, dense understanding. I stood and walked to the cabinet in the hallway, where I kept the things that mattered. Tucked behind photo albums and old tax returns was a flash drive. Next to it, a printed transcript of a voicemail I'd saved 2 Christmases ago. I came back and handed both to Caleb. That's a message Jenna left me after too many glasses of wine, I said. She didn't know the machine had picked up, called me a parasite, said you needed to cut me out before I poisoned Ethan too. He listened to it in silence. The transcript rested on his lap, but the recording played from his phone. Clear, clipped, and unmistakably Jenna. She told me you were paranoid, he whispered. Said you were accusing people of things that didn't happen, that you were unraveling. And you believed her, I said. Not as an accusation, just a statement. I didn't want to, he said, but I didn't stop her either. I leaned forward slightly, eyes on him. You let her build a world where I was the villain, because it was easier than seeing the rot at the center of your marriage. He didn't argue. I showed Ethan last night, he said. All of it, he cried. Mom, he thought you ghosted him, thought you were done with him. I blinked slowly, feeling a familiar ache rising in my chest. Not rage, just the kind of pain that comes when someone you love remembers you wrong. Then he has a choice, I said. The clause in the trust stands. If he wants to know me again, he knows where to find me. Caleb nodded slowly. What happens now? Now, I said, you decide whether you want to keep being her husband or be my son, but I'm done begging for space in my own family. He stood, walked to the door, then paused. If I could undo it. You can't, I said, but you can stop pretending it didn't happen. He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality I didn't need to narrate. I stood there in the stillness, the weight of years pressing against the quiet. And for the first time, I let myself feel it. Not just the betrayal, the grief. Not of being forgotten, of having watched it happen in slow motion and done nothing until it was nearly too late. I walked back into the kitchen and sat down with the pile of fake messages, lies, every one. But more than that, intentional smears. A crafted narrative designed to erase the truth of who I was. She didn't just want to exclude me, she wanted to rewrite me. And Caleb let her hold the pen. But not anymore. The story was back in my hands now. I didn't hear from Ethan for 3 days after Caleb's visit. I told myself I wasn't counting, but every time the phone buzzed or the door creaked from the wind, something in me stirred. Some fragile, ancient part of myself that still hoped, still waited. On the 4th day, just after lunch, I heard a car door shut outside. I peeked through the curtain. He was there, Ethan, standing on my porch in a navy sport coat, holding a folded piece of paper in his hand like it was the last map to something lost. His shoulders were tense, his gaze unsure. He looked like the boy I used to read bedtime stories to, brave but barely holding it together. I opened the door and didn't speak. I just waited. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped aside. He walked into the living room, like he wasn't sure he belonged anymore. His eyes scanned the space, slowly, lingering on the couch, the framed cross-stitch that read family is a verb, the vase he made me in 3rd grade, still sitting quietly on the mantel. I read everything Dad gave me, he said, voice quiet. I listened to that voicemail from Jenna. He paused. I didn't know what to think. I wanted to believe none of it was true, but when I confronted her, she didn't even deny it. He looked at me. She said it was for my own good. I didn't interrupt. I let him process it on his own terms. I thought you didn't want it to be there, he continued. I thought maybe you were angry at me, or maybe you weren't doing well and didn't want the stress. I didn't know how much of what I'd been told was real. He looked down at the folded paper and opened it slowly. It was a photo. Him and me, covered in flour, sitting on the kitchen floor, his arms around my neck. Both of us laughing like the world was too small to contain it. This has been in my wallet for years, he said. Every time I was scared or stressed or unsure, I'd take it out and look at it. But the last month, I started telling myself, maybe it didn't mean what I thought it did. He glanced at me. That's what she wanted. And I let her in. I let her fill in the blanks with poison. I sat on the couch and motioned for him to join me. She's clever, I said. She didn't just tell you lies. She used my voice, my words. She didn't erase me outright. She rewrote me. He sat beside me, hands folded over the photo. And I believed her. You did, I said gently. But now you're here. So what are you going to do about it? He looked startled by the question. I don't know, he said. I'm trying to figure that out. The wedding's this weekend. I know it's probably too late for a lot of things, but… He trailed off. I just couldn't let that version of you be the last one I believed in. I reached over and took his hand, the same hand I'd held when crossing busy streets, guiding him through crowds, wiping cookie crumbs from his cheeks. Then we start again, I said, but not through her. Not through anyone else, just us. He nodded slowly. And in that moment, I saw my grandson again, not the man trained to be diplomatic and composed, but the boy who used to dance in the kitchen with batter on his nose. We sat in silence for a long while. I should go, he said eventually. But I'll be back. Before the wedding. I walked him to the door. As he stepped outside, he turned back, hesitating. Can I ask you something? Of course. If she hadn't lied, if everything had gone normal, would you have still given me the money? I smiled faintly. If everything had gone normal, I wouldn't have needed to. He nodded, like he understood more than I said. Then he walked to his car and drove away. I stood on the porch, long after he'd gone, the wind tugging at the hem of my cardigan. Maybe, just maybe, the story I'd been written out of wasn't finished yet. The next evening, I went to the grocery store. It should have been a normal trip, just a few things I'd forgotten for the weekend. Eggs, garlic, the good olive oil. I had my reusable tote bag folded in the cart, my reading glasses perched on my nose, and a list scribbled on a yellow notepad that was more crossed out than written on. I was standing in the frozen food aisle, debating between chicken pot pie and lasagna, when I heard her voice, low, smooth, polished like the handle of a knife. Well, nice to see you out and about, Eleanor. I didn't turn right away. I let the sound linger in the air, like the echo of a bell I didn't want to acknowledge. Then I slowly looked up. Jenna stood at the end of the aisle, arms folded across her chest, lips pulled into that half-smile she wore like a weapon. Her hair was pinned back in a sleek bun, her nails perfect. As always, she looked like she'd just stepped out of a catalog for women who smiled while ruining lives. I said nothing. She stepped closer. Her voice dropped an octave. That little stunt, with the trust, she said. Real, mature. I placed the pot pie in my basket and met her eyes. I think it proves you underestimated the wrong woman. She let out a soft scoff, the kind that's more condescending than laughter. You've spent your whole life clinging to Caleb and Ethan like they owe you something. You think because you paid for a few things, you get to control everyone? I gave more than money, I replied, voice steady. I gave years, time, love. You rewrote history and expected me to thank you for the edits. Her expression darkened. I didn't rewrite anything. I just cleaned up the narrative. Caleb needed space. Ethan needed boundaries. You made everything about you. I tilted my head slightly, as if studying a rare insect. You told people I had memory issues, that I was unstable. She didn't even blink. Because you are. My hands curled tighter around the handle of the cart, but my voice didn't rise. Who makes their grandson jump through legal hoops just to get what they're owed? She added. I took a breath. Let it settle in my lungs before speaking. You don't get to decide what I owe anyone. Ethan came to me on his own. He saw through you. Her jaw tensed. You poisoned him against me. No, I said softly. You did that all by yourself. You forgot something, Jenna. Manipulation always leaves fingerprints, and eventually, the light finds them. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the lavender and venom in her perfume. Enjoy your little victory, she said. It won't last. Caleb's still my husband, Ethan's still my stepson, and you're still alone. I smiled, calm, unshaken. Maybe, but I'm alone with my name intact. I pushed my cart past her without another word, left the list behind, left the pot pie too. I didn't need it anymore. I drove home with the windows cracked open, the spring air washing away the last of her voice. That night, just before midnight, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. One line. I have the recording. She admitted everything. I sat down slowly, the message glowing on the screen like a candle in a dark cave. Another came. I didn't even ask. She just went off, said, "You always turn people against her." I recorded the whole thing. My fingers hovered above the screen. I typed back, "Send it to your dad first. He needs to hear it from her mouth, not mine." His reply came seconds later. "Already did. He hasn't responded." I set the phone down and looked out the window. A moth fluttered against the glass, drawn hopelessly toward the light it would never reach. Caleb would hear it, all of it. Unfiltered, unedited. Not from me, not from denial, from her own mouth. I thought about the years I spent biting my tongue, shrinking myself to keep the peace, smoothing over their cruelty with recipes and cards and open doors. But peace had never existed. It was just silence, stretched thin, overwrought, and now the silence was broken. What came next would finally be honest. 2 days later, Caleb called and asked to set a time for everyone to meet. "Me, you, Ethan, Jenna, Ava," he said, "and Aunt Darla. She wants to be there." Darla, Tom's sister. We hadn't spoken in over a year. Not since she called Jenna a smiling guillotine over Thanksgiving, and Caleb got defensive. I'd always thought she was sharp, a little too blunt for comfort, but I never doubted her clarity. "We need to get everything out in the open," Caleb said. I agreed, but on my terms. My house, my time, my rules. He didn't argue. Sunday afternoon, 2 p.m. I woke early that day, spent the morning setting up chairs in the living room, not too close, not too far. I put 6 folders on the coffee table, each one labeled with a name. Inside were copies of the trust amendment, screenshots of Jenna's fabricated texts, bank transfer logs, and the transcript of the voicemail Ethan had sent me. The one where Jenna ranted about how I'd infected the family with guilt and victimhood. I didn't feel nervous, not that morning. I felt ready. At exactly 5:57 p.m., they arrived. Caleb walked in first, his shoulders tight, his jaw locked. Ethan followed, expression unreadable, hands in his pockets. Jenna came in last. She didn't look at me. Her lips were drawn thin, and her eyes darted from wall to wall like she was mapping the exits. Ava was already seated beside me, calm, poised, legal pad open, and Darla, bless her, walked in with a notebook and pen in hand, like she'd been preparing depositions. I waited until everyone was seated. No one spoke. "I want to make something clear," I began. "This isn't about revenge. This is about accountability." I handed each person a folder. "What you'll find inside is documentation from the last 6 months. Calls I never received, messages I never sent, conversations that never happened but were used to exclude me from my own family's milestones." Jenna rolled her eyes. "This is absurd. You're treating this like a courtroom." I looked straight at her. "You're right, because that's what you've been running from. Proof, facts, and people who don't forget the truth just because you rewrite it out loud." Caleb opened his folder. His eyes scanned the contents in silence. Ethan sat beside him, already familiar with most of it, but I saw something shift in his face as he read it all laid out, full scope, no omissions. Ava cleared her throat. "Every financial disbursement is documented. Every trust transfer. The clause requiring Ethan's visit has been legally fulfilled." Jenna turned sharply to Caleb. "You really going to sit here and let them do this to me?" Caleb didn't look up. "You lied," he said, voice low. "To me, to Ethan, to everyone. And I let—" "Oh, give me a break," she snapped. "She's been playing the martyr for decades." Darla leaned forward, folding her hands calmly. "You might want to reconsider your tone. I've seen what's in those folders, and it matches what I remember from years ago. This isn't new, Jenna. You've just gotten sloppier." Jenna's face flushed red. "Of course you're siding with her. You never liked me." "No," Darla said evenly. "I just see patterns. And I've seen this one before." Caleb finally looked up. His voice cracked when he said, "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't," I replied, "but you start by not protecting it anymore." Ethan spoke next. His voice was clear. I'm still marrying her, but not blind, and not at the cost of the people who stood by me. He stood and walked to my side, placing a hand on my shoulder. A simple gesture, but in that moment, it felt like a reclamation. Jenna let out a hollow laugh. This is insane. You people are buying into a narrative built on paranoia and guilt. I met her eyes. No, we're finally rejecting the one built on silence and fear. Caleb stood now too, slower than Ethan, but steadier than before. I think you should leave, Jenna. She stared at him, like he'd slapped her. You're seriously kicking me out? I'm asking you to step out, so the rest of us can speak honestly, without being manipulated again. She grabbed her purse, muttering something sharp under her breath, and stormed out. The front door slammed behind her. Caleb didn't sit again. He looked around the room, like he was finally seeing the rot beneath the carpet. I should have stopped this sooner, he said, but I kept thinking it would get better, that it was just stress, or miscommunication. I didn't want to believe I'd handed over my mother's dignity in exchange for peace. I nodded once. You believed comfort over clarity. It's what most people choose, until it costs too much. Darla closed her notebook. What now? She asked. I reached for the last envelope on the table and passed it to Caleb. This is my final revision, I said. It removes you permanently from the trust. Not to punish you, but because trust isn't money. It's belief. That someone will protect your name when you're not in the room. And you didn't. He opened it, read it, nodded slowly. I understand. Ethan looked between us. And me? I pulled out a single sheet of paper, his reinstatement, signed and notarized that morning. You earned it, I said. By showing up. By asking questions. By seeing me again. He held the paper like it was more than legal. It was personal. And it. Caleb folded his envelope and placed it back on the table. Whatever happens with Jenna, I don't expect anything. But I want to say I'm sorry. Not just for this, but for all the ways I let her take your place. I didn't speak. Just watched him a moment, then said, the apology isn't the end, Caleb. It's the beginning, but only if your actions changed. He nodded, eyes shining. Then he turned and walked toward the front door without needing to be told. As it closed behind him, I exhaled. Not in relief, in finality. This wasn't a battle I won. It was a war I survived. And for once, the battlefield belonged to the truth. The wedding came and went a week later. I didn't go, not because I wasn't welcome anymore, but because I chose not to. I had seen enough, endured enough. What I needed from this family wasn't a spot in their photos or a polite seat at a table I once built with my bare hands. What I needed was already unfolding, quietly, in the space they never expected me to reclaim for myself. The day after the ceremony, Ethan came by again. He was still in his suit, minus the tie, jacket draped over his shoulder, and in his hands he carried a white bakery box. Leftover cake, he said, holding it out with a small grin. Thought you might like the lemon slice. We sat on the porch, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floorboards. The trees rustled in a breeze that smelled like lilac and rain. We ate our cake in silence at first, forks scraping against cardboard, the icing soft and sweet, but not as sweet as the look on Ethan's face when he finally spoke. It wasn't the same without you. I nodded, but didn't respond. She kept her distance, he said. After a moment, Dad told her that if she so much as looked at you sideways again, he'd file for separation. I raised an eyebrow. And you? He shrugged, gaze fixed on the horizon. I don't know yet. We're married. I love her. But I'm seeing things now that I didn't let myself see before. And it's hard to look at someone the same after hearing them lie in your grandmother's voice. I let the silence sit between us for a while. Let it breathe. Then I said, but I'm glad you came. Before it was too late. Ethan reached into his wallet and pulled out the same photo he'd shown me before, the one of us laughing in the kitchen, covered in flour and joy. I had this in my pocket at the altar, he said, not for luck, for truth. Because you're the reason I know how to love someone without expecting anything in return. My throat tightened, but I held it down. Keep it there, I said. And don't let anyone convince you again that protecting someone means hiding from the truth. He nodded slowly. What about Dad? I looked out at the yard, at the garden I'd nurtured for 30 years. That's between him And himself now. He made his choices. I'm not here to manage the aftermath anymore. I'm just here to live the rest of my life on my terms. He didn't argue. He understood. We sat together until the sun dipped low behind the trees, until the bugs came out and the wind shifted cooler. When he finally stood to leave, he hugged me tight. Not like a goodbye, like a reset. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. After he left, I walked back inside. I opened the drawer where I'd hidden the wedding invitation and pulled it out carefully. The gold foil edges had curled just slightly. I carried it to my old cedar chest and opened the lid. Inside were family records, old letters, birth certificates, and now the legal papers that changed everything. I slid the invitation in beside them. Not to erase history, to record it properly. I poured myself a glass of wine, turned off my phone, and sat in my favorite chair by the window. The light outside was soft now, like the house had finally taken a deep breath and settled into itself. No noise. No pretending. Just peace. The kind you earn when you stop asking people to see your worth and start living like they never had to. I wasn't erased. I rewrote myself back in. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking backward. I was looking forward. To mornings with fresh coffee and no expectations. To evenings spent watering my garden without wondering if someone would think to call. To a life that was smaller, maybe, but fully mine. And I was okay with that. Because I didn't just survive the storm. I anchored through it. And now the sea was finally calm,